Blood dripped from the parchment onto marble floors. The caliph's hands shook, not from age, but from reading words that would destroy everything his dynasty claimed to be. "Burn this," he commanded, his voice barely a whisper. "Burn every copy. Kill anyone who speaks of it." In that moment, the most powerful man in the medieval world tried to erase history itself. He failed. The story survived in monastery walls, in soldiers' whispers, in coded Byzantine texts. The story of 300 men who didn't just win a battle, they destroyed an empire's soul. When the Scoli Gigantes annihilated 15,000 elite troops and captured the caliph's own nephew, they lit a fuse that would detonate across 3 continents. If you believe forgotten history deserves to be remembered, please hit that like button now. It helps this story reach others who value truth over propaganda. This is the battle the Abbasid Caliphate died trying to hide. The humiliation was too complete. The consequences too catastrophic. Because when you understand what really happened in that Armenian mountain pass in 863 AD, you understand why the greatest empire of its age began to die. Not from invasion, not from rebellion, but from shame so deep they tried to burn it from existence. In 863 AD, if you stood in the round city of Baghdad during Friday prayers, you'd witness the heartbeat of the world's richest empire. 20,000 voices rising in unison from the Grand Mosque. Gold dinars flowing like water through markets that sold silk from China, spices from India, slaves from Africa. The Abbasid Caliphate stretched from Tunisia's shores to the Oxus River, larger than Rome at its peak. But empires are like glass sculptures. Beautiful from afar, fragile up close. The Caliph al-Mutawakil ruled from behind palace walls, increasingly dependent on foreign soldiers who felt no loyalty to Arab tradition. His Turkish guards, purchased as boys, trained as killers, had tasted power during succession disputes. They watched the caliph with wolf eyes, waiting. In the provinces, governors who once sent tribute now sent excuses. The governor of Egypt built his own fleet. The ruler of Khorasan minted coins with suspiciously small mentions of the caliph's name. Each acted like independent kings while maintaining the fiction of unity. But the deepest crack ran through the army itself. Arab commanders resented Turkic officers. Persian Muslims felt excluded from power. Berber converts faced discrimination. The magnificent military machine that had conquered from Spain to India now fought itself in barracks brawls and poisoned dinners. The empire held together through momentum and myth. The myth that Allah's favor made Abbasid armies invincible. That their banners could never fall. That no enemy could stand against the united faithful. That myth was about to die in Armenian snow, killed by 300 men who understood a fundamental truth. Empires aren't destroyed by losing battles. They're destroyed by losing face. Emir Umar ibn Abdullah al-Aqta had every reason for confidence as he reviewed his forces outside Mosul. 15,000 veteran soldiers answered his call. Kurdish cavalry who'd raided Byzantine lands for decades, Syrian infantry blooded in countless border wars, Khorasani horse archers who could put 3 arrows through a shield at full gallop. More importantly, he carried the blood of the Prophet in his veins. Nephew to the Caliph, conqueror of 30 fortresses, he'd never lost a major engagement. At 35, he stood at the apex of military glory. This campaign would cement his legend. The plan was simple, brilliant in its scope. While Umar's advance force secured the Armenian passes, a grand army of 50,000 would mass near Melitene. Together, they would punch through Byzantine Anatolia like a spear through silk. Constantinople itself might fall within 2 years. "The Romans are finished," Umar told his commanders over maps in his silk pavilion. "Their emperor is a drunkard. Their themes are undermanned. Their best troops died fighting Bulgars." He chose the Armenian route for good reason. The passes were narrow but secure, controlled by local Muslim allies. No significant Byzantine force had been seen there in years. Speed mattered more than caution. He needed to link with the main army before winter. On September 3, 863, Umar's column began its march. The formation stretched over a mile, light cavalry scouting ahead, the emir's personal guard of 500 ghulams at the center, infantry companies behind, supply trains and camp followers creating a tail that seemed endless. They moved with the confidence of predators in familiar territory. Veterans joked about Byzantine cowardice. Young soldiers dreamed of Constantinople's gold. The column's pace was aggressive, 20 miles a day through difficult terrain. No one noticed they were being watched, shadowed, herded. In Constantinople's Magnaura Palace, Emperor Michael III studied intelligence reports with eyes sharper than his reputation suggested. His enemies called him Michael the Drunkard, a name he cultivated carefully. Let them think him weak. Drunk men don't plan 2 years ahead. Beside him stood Bardas, his uncle and Caesar. Where Michael played the fool, Bardas was the blade. A military intellectual who read Arab tactical manuals in the original, who understood that wars were won in the mind before the battlefield. Umar takes the bait, Bardas confirmed, reading dispatches from Armenian agents. 15,000 men, moving fast, light on supplies. Michael smiled, the cold smile of a man holding winning cards. For 2 years, they'd leaked false intelligence about Byzantine weakness. Pulled troops from visible garrisons. Let border defenses appear to crumble. All to create irresistible temptation. But the masterstroke was the giants. The Scoli Gigantes weren't just elite guards, they were psychological weapons. Bardas had handpicked each man. Minimum height 6 feet 4 inches, from the harshest regions of the empire. Men who'd killed wolves with bare hands in Anatolian winters. Who'd survived Caucasian blood feuds. Who'd proven themselves in border raids before age 20. Their training went beyond muscle. They studied enemy languages, memorized terrain, learned engineering. Each could fight mounted or dismounted, in formation or alone. But Bardas's true genius was theatrical. Their armor was designed to intimidate, their reputation carefully cultivated through selective operations. The captain he chose for this mission was known only as the Draconarius, the dragon bearer. Even other giants spoke his name quietly. A man who'd led 12 successful deep penetration raids. Who'd once held a bridge against 40 Bulgar warriors until reinforcements arrived. Whose tactical mind matched his physical prowess. 300 men against 15,000, Michael mused. The numbers seem impossible. Numbers are illusion, Bardas replied. Fear is reality. When those 300 strike, they won't just kill Umar's army. They'll kill the Caliphate's certainty. And uncertainty, nephew, is the poison that rots empires from within. The orders were precise. Total annihilation. Leave just enough survivors to spread terror. Take Umar alive if possible. A living symbol of humiliation worth more than a dead martyr. On August 27th, the Draconarius selected his 300. They left Constantinople in small groups, some as merchants, others as pilgrims, a few in stolen Arab uniforms. Their weapons traveled separately in hidden compartments of grain wagons. They had 3 weeks to reach position. 3 weeks to prepare hell itself. The stage was set. The actors in motion. The Abbasid Caliphate, brittle with hidden cracks, was about to receive a blow aimed not at its body but its soul. Umar marched toward his destiny, confident in numbers, tradition, and divine favor. He had no idea he was already dead. The only question was how many would die with him, and how an empire would die from the shame. The last citizen of Constantinople to see the giants leave was a baker named Theocritos, preparing his ovens before dawn on August 27th. He watched 3 tall men in merchant robes lead pack horses toward the Chrysius gate. Something in their movement, too fluid, too coordinated, made him shiver. When he mentioned it to his wife, she crossed herself and whispered a prayer. Across the city, similar scenes played out. Groups of 2, 5, never more than 8, slipping through different gates. Some dressed as Syrian traders with pepper and silk samples. Others wore the rough wool of Armenian pilgrims. A handful bore the insignia of Arab auxiliary troops, deserters heading home. The Draconarius himself left through the harbor of Theodosius, playing a Coptic priest traveling to Jerusalem. His height drew stares, but the prominent cross and mumbled prayers in Egyptian-accented Greek sold the deception. The scar running from his left ear to his jaw was hidden beneath a false beard that itched terribly. Their weapons took different paths. Byzantine intelligence had cultivated smugglers who believed they were transporting illegal wine. Barrels marked with vintner seals contained carefully wrapped mail, helmets, and the specialized chains that made giants feared in close combat. Grain wagons with false bottoms carried their lances, broken into sections for reassembly. The true genius lay in the route planning. No group followed another's path. They moved through different provinces, staying at different caravanserais, never acknowledging each other even when paths crossed. If captured, each man carried documents supporting their cover story, aged with smoke and sweat to look authentic. By September 10th, they began converging on a Byzantine monastery near Lake Van, officially abandoned, actually maintained by imperial agents. Brother Kirill, the sole monk, had spent 3 years building trust with locals while mapping every goat path in the region. The giants arrived in darkness, guided by creek beds and star navigation. Inside the monastery's hidden basement, they transformed. Off came disguises. On went the armor that turned men into nightmares. The Draconarius checked each man personally: weapon condition, armor fit, mental state. Remember, he told them in the pre-dawn blackness of September 14th, we're not just soldiers today. We're architects of fear. Every detail matters. Every death has purpose. The survivors must believe they escaped hell itself. They moved into the mountains like wolves returning to familiar dens. The Valley of Shadows earned its name honestly. Local shepherds avoided it even in summer. The steep walls blocked sunlight except for 2 hours at midday, creating a perpetual twilight that made sheep nervous and men uncomfortable. In September, with early snow on the peaks, it felt like entering the underworld. The Draconarius had studied this ground through scout reports for months. Now, seeing it personally, he smiled the thin smile of a chess player recognizing checkmate 5 moves ahead. The valley stretched 3 miles, but only one section mattered: a 200-yard narrows where ancient rockfalls created natural barriers. Here the path squeezed to barely 30 yards wide, with cliffs rising 80 feet on the north side, 60 feet on the south. A stream ran along the southern wall, fed by mountain springs. Nature did half our work, he told his lieutenants. We perfect the rest. Working only at night, the giants became engineers of destruction. They identified boulders balanced on cliff edges, tons of rock needing only leverage to fall. Using techniques learned from Byzantine siege engineers, they wedged logs beneath key stones, creating triggers that one man could activate. The stream provided inspiration. By moving rocks and cutting channels, they diverted water across the valley floor in 3 places. Within 2 nights, solid ground became sucking mud covered with a thin dust crust. A man running would break through, sinking to his knees. But the masterpiece was the fire trap. The narrowest point of the pass, where any force would compress, they prepared a gift. Byzantine fire siphon troops had taught them that Greek fire's secret wasn't just the mixture, it was preparation and placement. They soaked dried brush with naphtha, covered it with gravel and sand. Ceramic pots filled with the empire's most guarded secret were buried at precise intervals. From above, it looked like normal valley floor. In reality, it was a 50-yard death trap waiting for a spark. The giants themselves needed fighting positions. They carved ledges into the cliffsides, not randomly, but in overlapping fields of fire. Each position could support the others. Ropes, invisible against dark rock, allowed rapid movement between levels. They cached weapons at multiple points. A giant separated from his lance would find javelins within reach. By September 17th, as Umar's army camped just 10 miles away, everything was ready. The Draconarius gathered his men in the pre-dawn darkness. Today we rest, eat well, sleep. Tomorrow, we remind the world why Rome endured 1,000 years. Not through numbers, through will, craft, and the kind of violence that makes men question their faith. He assigned positions with economy. 50 men under his best lieutenant would seal the western exit. Another 50 would block the eastern entrance once enough enemy entered. The remaining 200, split into 4 groups, would hold the cliffsides. Wait for my signal. The horn sounds once. Reveal yourselves. Twice. Begin the rockfall. 3 times. Ignite the ground. After that, trust your training and show no mercy. Questions. There were none. These men had moved beyond questions into that cold space where warriors become weapons. September 18th dawned gray and cold. In the valley, 300 giants checked weapons one final time and took positions. Several miles east, 15,000 men of the Caliphate broke camp, eager to make distance before weather turned worse. The trap was perfect. The prey approaching. History holding its breath. What would you have done in their position? Facing 50-1 odds, would you have trusted in planning and position, or tried to negotiate? Share your thoughts below. I read every comment and love learning how different minds approach impossible situations. Dawn mist clung to the Valley of Shadows as Umar's vanguard entered. 200 Kurdish light cavalry, men who'd scouted these passes before, reported nothing unusual. The narrow valley was empty, silent except for water trickling along the southern wall. They pushed forward, eager to exit the gloomy defile. Behind them, the main force compressed into marching formation. The emir rode with his 500 ghulams at the column center, their mail polished despite the campaign, green banners proclaiming the caliph's authority. Syrian infantry followed in companies, then supply wagons, then the Khorasani horse archers bringing up the rear. The Draconarius watched from his position 60 feet up the north cliff. He'd chosen this spot carefully, clear sight lines to both ends of the kill zone, hidden from below by an overhang. His lieutenants waited for his signal, invisible against dark rock. He let the vanguard pass. Let the ghulams enter. Counted infantry companies as they compressed into the narrows. When 5,000 men packed the valley floor, nearly a third of Umar's force, he raised the carved horn to his lips. The sound that emerged wasn't a military call. It was designed by Byzantine psychological warfare specialists to trigger primal fear, a low, growling note that echoed off stone until it seemed to come from the earth itself. Dragons roar, demons howl, death's whistle. Along the cliffs, purple shapes emerged from hidden positions. The giants didn't rush to attack. They simply stood, letting morning light catch on scale armor and specially designed helmets. The helms bore no human features. Instead, snarling beast faces crafted by Constantinople's finest metalworkers. From below, they looked like iron demons manifesting from stone itself. For a heartbeat, Umar's army froze. Then training kicked in. Officers shouted orders. The ghulams shifted into defensive formation around their prince. Archers knocked arrows. Loose! The command echoed through the ranks. Hundreds of arrows soared upward. They struck cliff faces, bounced off shields, fell harmlessly back. The giants hadn't moved. They stood like statues, purple cloaks stirring in mountain wind, waiting. Umar himself rode forward, magnificent in gold-worked mail. "They're men," he shouted. "Just men. Count them, 300 at most. We are 15,000. Form ranks and—" The horn sounded twice. Thunder without storm. The earth shook as massive boulders, carefully prepared, plummeted from the cliffs. There was no dodging in the compressed space. Rocks the size of oxen smashed into packed formations. Men vanished beneath tons of stone. Horses screamed, rearing, adding to the chaos. But this was calculated destruction. The Draconarius had marked specific targets. One massive stone crushed the command group behind Umar, eliminating senior officers. Another blocked the eastern exit, trapping those inside. A third shattered supply wagons, creating barriers of splintered wood and panicked animals. The Arab force, professional soldiers all, tried to maintain discipline. Shields went up. Formations tightened. Then they discovered the mud. Cavalry attempting to charge the cliff bases broke through the dust crust into sucking mire. Horses floundered, throwing riders. Infantry trying to spread out found their movement slowing, boots trapped. The careful water diversions had created strips of bog exactly where troops would naturally move. In the chaos, Umar's voice rose clear. "Hold position. Archers, maintain fire. Infantry, advance on the—" The horn sounded 3 times. Hell bloomed in the valley floor. Giants on the cliffsides threw ceramic spheres that shattered on impact. Where they struck the prepared ground, Byzantine fire erupted in gouts of liquid flame. The carefully laid naphtha-soaked brush ignited instantly, creating walls of fire that sectioned the Arab force like a butcher dividing meat. This wasn't random destruction. The Draconarius had mapped exact ignition points. Fire erupted at the valley's exits first, sealing escape routes. Then at predetermined intervals, creating isolated pockets of 200 to 300 men each. Manageable numbers for systematic slaughter. The narrow valley became an oven. Smoke rose thick, choking. The screams of burning men mixed with horses shrieking. Soldiers fled the flames only to bog in mud or crowd against comrades, creating crushes that killed as surely as swords. Now the giants descended. They rappelled down on ropes, forming wedges as they landed. 25 men each, shields locked, lances leveled. These weren't berserkers seeking glory. They were professionals executing a plan with mechanical precision. The first wedge hit a pocket of Syrian infantry pressed against the northern cliff. The giants' formation was designed for this, a narrow spear point that punched through disordered enemies. Their lances, longer than standard, struck before defenders could respond. When lances shattered, they drew swords without breaking stride. But it was the chains that spread true terror. Each giant carried a weighted chain that could extend 6 feet. In trained hands, they became weapons of horrifying versatility. Whirled overhead, they shattered shields. Lashed sideways, they entangled legs, bringing men down to be finished by following ranks. One giant wrapped his chain around an officer's neck, dragging him through his own men's ranks while the officer's attempts to free himself only tightened the iron grip. A group of Khorasani tried to form a shield wall. The second giant wedge struck them at an angle, using the cliff wall to prevent flanking. The giants' height advantage meant they struck over shield rims. Their specially designed swords, longer, heavier than standard Byzantine Spathians, split helmets like melons. In the center, Umar's Ghulams fought with desperate courage. These were the Caliphate's elite, trained from childhood, equipped with the finest Damascus steel. They formed a square around their emir, presenting walls of locked shields and protruding spears. For a moment, it seemed they might hold. The Draconarius had watched the battle develop from above, directing wedges with horn signals. Now, seeing Umar's guard coalescing, he acted personally. He descended not by rope but by a series of carved handholds, moving with impossible grace for a man in full armor. His personal guard, 20 giants who'd served with him longest, followed. They struck the Ghulam square from above and behind, where no attack was expected. The Draconarius fought with weapons in both hands, sword in the right, chain in the left. Witnesses later swore he moved like water, never where strikes aimed, always where defense weakened. His sword carved through mail as if it were cloth. His chain yanked shields aside, creating openings his guard exploited. But mere killing wasn't the goal. The Draconarius carved a path toward one man, Umar ibn Abdullah al-Akhta, nephew of the Caliph, blood of the Prophet. Umar, to his credit, didn't cower. Seeing death approaching, he spurred his horse directly at the Draconarius. It was a magnificent charge, the emir's lance perfectly leveled, his form textbook, his courage unquestionable. The Draconarius didn't dodge. He dropped his sword, grabbed the lance just behind the head, and used Umar's momentum against him. Physics, not strength. The emir flew from his saddle, crashing to bloody ground. As Umar struggled to rise, the chain whipped out, wrapping around his ankle. The Draconarius dragged the emir through mud and blood and bodies to kneel before him. Around them, the last Ghulams died fighting. Umar, breathing hard, lifted his chin. "Finish it, dog." The Draconarius removed his beast-faced helmet, revealing scarred features and cold gray eyes. When he spoke, it was in perfect Arabic. "Death would make you a martyr. You'll live, Umar ibn Abdullah. Live to be displayed in Constantinople like a caught fish. Live knowing your name will forever mean failure." He struck once, precisely, with the pommel of his sword. Umar collapsed unconscious. The battle, slaughter, more accurately, was ending. Cut off from escape, pressed between fire and giants, split into fragments, the Abbasid army died in pieces. Some groups fought to the last man. Others threw down weapons, begging for mercy in languages their killers understood but ignored. The killing continued with mechanical efficiency until the horn sounded 4 times. Cease action. Of 15,000 men who'd entered the Valley of Shadows confident in their superiority, fewer than 300 escaped. They fled west, carrying wounds both physical and psychological. Many were badly burned. All were marked by what they'd seen. The giants had lost 13 dead, 31 wounded. They controlled a valley carpeted with enemy dead, still smoking from Byzantine fire, mud mixed with blood creating a swamp of horror. The Draconarius stood over Umar's unconscious form, already planning the next phase. The battle was won. Now came the harder task, ensuring this victory echoed through history, bringing down an empire through shame alone. He looked at the carnage surrounding him and felt nothing. This wasn't cruelty. It was calculation. Every dead man was a message. Every survivor a messenger. The real destruction would come when those messages reached Baghdad, when an empire built on victory learned its best general had been taken like a lamb for slaughter. The Valley of Shadows had earned a new name, whispered by those who fled, Wadi al-Maut, the Valley of Death. But death was just the beginning. The first survivor reached the main Abbasid camp at Erzurum 3 days after the slaughter. His horse collapsed and died as he tumbled from the saddle, burns covering half his body, eyes wild with fever and memory. "Gone," he gasped to the physicians who rushed to help. "All gone. The mountains gave birth to demons." Within hours, more survivors straggled in. Each told fragments of the same nightmare. Purple-cloaked giants who appeared from stone, fire that erupted from solid ground, the emir dragged away in chains. Their accounts grew with each telling. 300 became 3,000. The giants gained wings. The Draconarius breathed flames. General Wasif al-Turki, commanding the 50,000-strong main force, tried to maintain order. He separated survivors, questioning them individually. The core facts remained consistent beneath the embellishments. Total annihilation, Byzantine trap, Umar captured alive. "Gather the senior commanders," Wasif ordered his aide. But when he entered his command tent an hour later, he found chaos. The Khorasani general stood nose to nose with his Syrian counterpart, shouting about divine punishment. Kurdish tribal leaders clustered together, speaking in low voices about omens ignored. The Egyptian contingent's commander was notably absent, already in his own camp, preparing to leave. "Silence!" Wasif slammed his fist on the map table. "We are soldiers of the Caliphate. One defeat. Defeat!" The Khorasani general's voice dripped contempt. This wasn't defeat. This was judgment. The emir of the faithful's own blood, taken like a goat for slaughter. What does that say about Allah's favor? The argument exploded. Old resentments between Arab and non-Arab commanders surfaced. Accusations flew. Why had Umar taken that route? Who advised him? Why hadn't scouts detected 300 enemies? By nightfall, the camp was fracturing. The Khorasanis held a separate council, their Zoroastrian converts whispering that the old gods were angry. The Berber auxiliaries simply vanished in darkness, taking their knowledge of mountain warfare with them. Syrian troops fortified their section of camp against their supposed allies. Wasif woke to find a third of his army gone. The Khorasanis had marched east during the night. The Egyptian forces followed by dawn, their commander leaving a brief message. "We return to await the caliph's direct orders." Within a week, the grand invasion force had dissolved. Some units headed home. Others turned to raiding each other. The Byzantine border, which should have been under assault, stood unthreatened while Muslims fought Muslims over whose cowardice caused the disaster. In Constantinople, Byzantine agents reported the chaos with amazement. Emperor Michael raised his cup at the news. "Bardas, your giants killed more than an army. They killed an idea." The Caliph al-Mutawakkil received the news in his Palace of Eternity in Samarra, surrounded by Turkish guards whose loyalty grew thinner each year. The messenger who brought word of the Valley of Shadows prostrated himself, forehead touching marble, voice trembling as he reported the catastrophe. "How many witnesses?" was the Caliph's first question. "Perhaps 300 escaped, commander of the faithful." "Too many." Al-Mutawakkil turned to his vizier. "Send riders. Every survivor is to report to Samarra immediately for debriefing." But containing the story proved impossible. Soldiers talked to families. Families talked to neighbors. Within weeks, every bazaar from Damascus to Samarkand buzzed with versions of the tale. The numbers grew. 300 giants became 3,000, then 30,000. Umar wasn't just captured but transformed into stone, or burned alive, or eaten by the demon-faced warriors. Worse was the theological crisis. The Abbasid claim to rule rested on divine sanction. If Allah allowed the caliph's own nephew to suffer such humiliation, what did that say about the dynasty's legitimacy? The ulama, religious scholars, began asking dangerous questions in their Friday sermons. Some couched it carefully. "We must examine our sins that Allah would permit such trials." Others were bolder. "When the blood of the Prophet is taken in chains, perhaps heaven sends a message." Al-Mutawakkil's response was predictable but catastrophic. He ordered the arrest of several prominent clerics. When the Turkish guard was sent to seize them from their mosques, riots erupted in Baghdad's poorer quarters. The guard suppressed them brutally, but every cracked skull created 10 more dissidents. Then came the procession that shattered imperial prestige forever. Byzantine envoys arrived in Samarra with footage, a gift from Emperor Michael. They carried paintings, created by court artists who'd observed carefully. The images showed Umar ibn Abdullah al-Akta in chains, kneeling before cheering crowds in Constantinople's hippodrome. The emperor wishes the caliph to know his nephew lives in comfort, the lead envoy announced in perfect Arabic. He eats well, has servants, lacks nothing, except freedom. Perhaps an exchange could be arranged? The emperor has certain territorial requests. Al-Mutawakkil ordered the envoys killed. His Turkish guard commander, Buga the Elder, refused. Kill envoys bearing peaceful messages? Would you have every nation declare us barbarians? It was a small defiance. But the Turkish guards noticed their commander contradicting the caliph without consequence. Seeds of future rebellion found fertile ground. Provincial governors watched from afar as central authority wobbled. The governor of Egypt stopped sending tax revenues, claiming unusual expenses. Transoxiana's ruler began minting coins with his own image more prominent than the caliph's. Armenia's Muslim emirs opened secret negotiations with Byzantium. In the palace, Al-Mutawakkil grew paranoid. He trusted no one, saw plots everywhere. When his own son suggested negotiating for Umar's release, the caliph accused him of treason. The court became a place of whispers and fear. On the night of December 10, 863, the inevitable occurred. The Turkish guards moved through the palace like shadows. They'd planned for weeks, noting routines, bribing doorkeepers, ensuring key loyalists were on duty. Their leader, Buga the Younger, had decided the caliph's weakness endangered their own position. Better to kingmake than serve a failing king. Al-Mutawakkil was in his private chambers, studying reports of provincial rebellions, when they entered. He looked up from his papers, saw drawn swords, and understood immediately. "So it ends," he said quietly. "At least kill me quickly." They did, though not cleanly. 11 sword wounds marked the death of heaven's shadow on earth. His son Al-Muntasir was dragged from his bed and proclaimed caliph while his father's blood still pooled on Persian carpets. The new caliph's reign lasted 6 months before the Turkish guards poisoned him for showing too much independence. His successor survived 8 months. The next, barely 4. The caliphate had become a puppet show, with Turkish commanders pulling strings while Arabia's ancient families watched their legacy die. This period, the anarchy at Samarra, saw 4 caliphs murdered in a decade. Each assassination weakened central authority further. Provinces that had wavered declared independence. The Saffarids rose in the east, former coppersmiths who built a kingdom on Abbasid weakness. The Tulunids seized Egypt, creating a dynasty that ignored Baghdad entirely. The unified Islamic Empire, which had stretched from the Atlantic to Central Asia, shattered like a dropped mirror. Each piece reflected the whole but stood alone. Meanwhile, Byzantine armies advanced steadily eastward. With no unified resistance, they reclaimed territories lost centuries before. Cities that had been Muslim for generations suddenly flew the double-headed eagle again. The treasure captured from Umar's army funded new fortifications, new armies, a revitalized empire. The giants became the stuff of legend. Recruitment for Byzantine elite units soared as young men across the empire dreamed of joining their ranks. The Draconarius was promoted to domestic of the schools, commander of all imperial guards. His tactical innovations, small unit operations, psychological warfare, detailed intelligence preparation, became standard Byzantine doctrine. But perhaps the greatest victory was narrative. Every Byzantine soldier knew the story of 300 heroes who broke 15,000. Every Arab soldier wondered if purple-cloaked demons waited in the next pass. Confidence and doubt, the true weapons of empire, had changed hands as surely as any fortress. By 870, visiting Baghdad was like viewing a magnificent corpse. The round city still stood, markets still functioned, the caliph still held Friday prayers. But real power lived elsewhere, in Cairo with the Tulunids, in Bokhara with the Samanids, in the barracks of Turkish generals who made and unmade caliphs like changing clothes. The Abbasid Caliphate would limp on for centuries, but as a ghost of itself. The unity was gone. The certainty shattered. The myth of invincibility died in an Armenian valley with 15,000 men who learned that Allah's favor was not guaranteed, that empires were mortal, that 300 determined men could pull down the pillars of the world. All from a single hour of calculated slaughter. All from the shame too great to bear. The order went out from Samarra in January 864, marked with the Caliph's seal, concerning the recent border incident in the Armenian provinces. What followed was the most systematic attempt to erase a battle from history ever attempted. Official chroniclers received detailed instructions. The events of September 18th were to be described as a minor skirmish with bandits. Umar ibn Abdullah al-Aqta died heroically but insignificantly. No numbers. No location. No details that might inspire questions. Court historians who'd already written accounts found themselves summoned to the palace. Ahmad ibn Yahya watched as his manuscript, months of careful work, fed the flames in the vizier's brazier. When he protested that truth mattered, he lost his tongue to the executioner's blade. Others learned the lesson. The name Valley of Shadows vanished from official maps. Umar ibn Abdullah al-Aqta disappeared from genealogies, his wives told to remarry, his children absorbed into other households. Veterans who spoke of purple-cloaked giants found themselves arrested on charges of spreading enemy propaganda. In the military camps, the suppression took darker forms. A Syrian captain who described the battle while drunk woke to find his tent surrounded by guards. His execution was public, the charge announced as desertion, but every soldier understood the real crime, remembering. The Turkish guards proved especially efficient at enforcement. They had their own reasons for wanting the Abbasid humiliation forgotten, having tied their fortunes to the Caliphate's prestige. Soldiers learned to develop selective amnesia about their service records. "I served on the eastern frontier in 863, became the safe answer. Where exactly? Various posts. What actions? Border patrol. Even decades later, veterans would change the subject rather than risk old memories surfacing. But truth has its own persistence. In Constantinople, the Byzantines took opposite approach. They celebrated everywhere. Court artists painted the battle on palace walls in vivid detail. Each giant was portrayed larger than life, purple cloaks flowing, chains whirling through Arab ranks. Umar's capture became the central scene, his face showing noble despair as the Draconarius stood victorious above him. The court composer created a hymn, God Gave Strength to 300, sung at military ceremonies. Veterans of the giants received golden chains as medals, worn proudly at court functions. The Draconarius himself became a living monument, his scarred face appearing on coins commemorating Byzantine victories. But it wasn't just official celebration. Byzantine merchants carried the story along trade routes. In taverns from Thessalonica to Trebizond, they bought drinks with tales of the Valley of Shadows. Each telling grew more elaborate, but the core remained. Small numbers defeating vast armies through superior planning and divine favor. Armenian Christians preserved their own version. The Valley of Shadows lay in their lands. Some had served as guides for the giants. In monastery scriptoriums, monks illuminated manuscripts showing purple warriors descending from cliffs like avenging angels. These texts, written in Armenian rather than Greek or Arabic, escaped Abbasid censors. Most remarkably, the story survived in the very culture trying to suppress it. Arabic poetry had a tradition of encoding forbidden topics in metaphor. Poets wrote of the narrow place where eagles ate lions, of purple clouds that brought lightning without rain, of the noble bird caged in golden chains. One poet, Ibn al-Farid, wrote a lament that seemed to describe a failed harvest. The farmer sent his finest seed to the highland field, but the mountain itself rose against him. Now he sits in his empty granary, counting shadows while his neighbors feast. Initiates understood. The farmer was the caliph. The seed was Umar's army. The neighbors feasting were the Byzantines. The poem spread through the Islamic world, its true meaning hidden beneath agricultural metaphor. Military manuals proved another vector of preservation. Professional soldiers needed to study defeats to avoid repetition. Theoretical discussions of mountain ambush tactics included surprisingly specific details about cliff positions, fire preparation, and psychological warfare. Students reading between lines could reconstruct the Valley of Shadows. Even children's stories carried echoes. Parents warning offspring about mountain dangers spoke of the purple jinn who chain the proud. Nursery rhymes in Damascus included verses about 300 shadows that swallow the sun. The battle lived on in culture's unconscious memory. Today, if you drive the mountain roads near Lake Van in eastern Turkey, locals still avoid one particular valley as the sun sets. They call it different names: Valley of Shadows, Wadi al-Maut, or simply the Narrow Place. Shepherds graze flocks on the surrounding slopes, but not there. Archaeological evidence confirms the historical accounts. Excavations found Byzantine armor fragments, Arab weapons, and most tellingly, evidence of intensive burning in a confined area. The cliff faces still bear tool marks where positions were carved. When wind funnels through the narrows, the acoustic properties that made the Draconarius's horn so terrifying still function. But physical remnants matter less than the lesson carved into history's memory. The Valley of Shadows marked a turning point as significant as any famous battle. It proved that empires aren't just political entities but psychological constructs. The Abbasid Caliphate didn't fall because it lost 15,000 men, armies that size were raised seasonally. It fell because it lost its story of invincibility. When the caliph's own blood could be taken so completely, so humiliatingly, the divine mandate that justified Abbasid rule evaporated. Every subsequent crisis, the Turkish Guard coup, provincial rebellions, the rise of competing dynasties, stemmed from that seed of doubt planted in Armenian mountains. The Byzantines understood this. That's why they preserved every detail while their enemies tried to forget. They knew that in warfare, the story of victory matters as much as victory itself. The giants didn't just win a battle, they won the narrative war that followed. Modern military colleges study the Valley of Shadows as a masterpiece of asymmetric warfare. How do inferior numbers defeat superior forces? Through intelligence, preparation, psychological operations, and most importantly, understanding that breaking an enemy's will matters more than breaking their bodies. The Draconarius remains a figure of study, a commander who turned terrain into weapon, theater into tactics, and 300 men into an empire-breaking force. His employment of specialized equipment, detailed intelligence preparation, and psychological warfare presaged modern special operations by 1,000 years. But perhaps the deepest lesson lies in the cover-up's failure. The Abbasid attempt to erase the battle only magnified its impact. Every silenced witness became a martyr to truth. Every burned document created 10 rumors. Every execution sparked 100 whispered stories. Truth, once loosed, cannot be recaptured. The Byzantines knew this. The Abbasids learned it too late. In the end, 300 giants achieved what massive invasions could not. They broke an empire's confidence in itself. They proved that power isn't just about holding territory or commanding armies. It's about controlling the story a civilization tells about itself. When that story shatters, when the myth dies, the empire follows. The Valley of Shadows wasn't just a battle. It was a mirror held up to an empire, showing not strength but fatal fragility. The reflection was so horrifying that the Abbasid Caliphate spent its remaining centuries trying not to see it. But mirrors, once glimpsed, cannot be unseen. History isn't just dates and battles. It's about moments when everything changed. If this story moved you, please subscribe for more hidden histories that deserve to see light. Share this video with someone who thinks they know medieval history. And tell me in the comments below, what other erased battles should we uncover? What forgotten moments changed the world? I read every comment, and your suggestions shape future videos. Until next time, remember, the victors write history, but sometimes the truth writes itself.